This is an NBC News special report. The presidential debates, Ford and Carter in Philadelphia. Here is NBC News correspondent David Brinkley.
The two debaters, no doubt a little nervous, are in place. The house lights are dimmed. The audience is in the seats under instructions to do nothing but watch, listen, and be quiet. It might be said the campaign for president now begins, probably before the biggest audience ever to see any political event. Maybe 90 to 100 million in this country who can vote for one of the two debaters, and some millions more abroad who can't. And depending on how it goes, it's entirely possible the 1976 election will be won and lost here tonight. It will last 90 minutes. 3 reporters will ask the questions. There are time limits on the answers. No notes or prepared speeches allowed. The moderator is Edwin Newman of NBC News.
Moderator of this first debate of the 1976 campaign between Gerald R. Ford of Michigan, Republican candidate for president, and Jimmy Carter of Georgia, Democratic candidate for president. We thank you, President Ford, and we thank you, Governor Carter, for being with us tonight. There are to be 3 debates between the presidential candidates and 1 between the vice presidential candidates. All are being arranged by the League of Women Voters Education Fund. Tonight's debate, the first between presidential candidates in 16 years, and the first ever in which an incumbent president has participated, is taking place before an audience in the Walnut Street Theater in Philadelphia, just 3 blocks from Independence Hall. The television audience may reach 100 million in the United States and many millions overseas. Tonight's debate focuses on domestic issues and economic policy. Questions will be put by Frank Reynolds of ABC News, James Gannon of the Wall Street Journal, and Elizabeth Drew of the New Yorker magazine. Under the agreed rules, the first question will go to Governor Carter. That was decided by the toss of a coin. He will have up to 3 minutes to answer. 1 follow-up question will be permitted with up to 2 minutes to reply. President Ford will then have 2 minutes to respond. The next question will go to President Ford with the same time arrangements, and questions will continue to be alternated between the candidates. Each man will make a 3-minute statement at the end, Governor Carter to go first. President Ford and Governor Carter do not have any notes or prepared remarks with them this evening. Mr. Reynolds, your question for Governor Carter.
Mr. President, Governor Carter. Governor, in an interview with the Associated Press last week, you said you believe these debates would alleviate a lot of concern that some voters have about you.
It would be catastrophic if the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board became the tool of the political party that was in power. It's important for our future economic security that job be non-political and separate from the executive and the legislative branches.
Mrs. Drew?
Mr. President, the real problem with the FBI, and in fact all of the intelligence agencies, is there are no real laws governing them. Such laws as there are tend to be vague and open-ended. Now, you have issued some executive orders, but we've learned that leaving these agencies to executive discretion and direction can get them and, in fact, the country in a great deal of trouble. One president may be a decent man, the next one might not be. So what do you think about trying to write in some more protection by getting some laws governing these agencies?
You are familiar, of course, with the fact that I am the first president in 30 years who has reorganized the intelligence agencies in the federal government. The CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the others. We've done that by executive order, and I think we've tightened it up. We've straightened out their problems that developed over the last few years. It doesn't seem to me that it's needed or necessary to have legislation in this particular regard. I have recommended to the Congress, however, I'm sure you're familiar with this, legislation that would make it very proper and in the right way that the Attorney General could go in and get the right for wiretapping under security cases. This was an effort that was made by the Attorney General and myself, working with the Congress. But even in this area, where I think new legislation would be justified, the Congress has not responded. So I feel in that case, as well as in the reorganization of the intelligence agencies, as I've done, we have to do it by executive order. And I'm glad that we have a good director in George Bush. We have good executive orders, and the CIA and the DIA and NASA, or NSA, are now doing a good job under proper supervision.
Governor Carter?
Well, one of the very serious things that's happened in our government in recent years, and has continued up until now, is a breakdown in the trust among our people in the
The pool broadcasters from Philadelphia have temporarily lost the audio. It is not a conspiracy against Governor Carter or President Ford, and they will fix it as soon as possible. This debate is now within about 8 minutes of its close, and in spite of the fact that this was under the auspices of the League of Women Voters, the pool audio from Philadelphia has been lost momentarily. We hope to have it back any minute. We don't know what's happened to it. Again, the pool audio from the Walnut Street Theater in Philadelphia has been lost, we hope, for the moment. We are, needless to say, trying to restore it. Do not know what has happened to it. Both candidates have lost a more or less equal number of their words. I can't hear them either, so I don't know what it is we're not hearing. I think they have stopped because they have been told the sound has been lost. I think they've stopped talking. Whatever happened, we hope to have it fixed shortly. I wish I could tell you more about it, but that's all I know. We will be back here with a special program in which we will ask people in the audience in the theater in Philadelphia as they leave, ask others in the area and whoever we can find whose views might be interesting, what they think about the debate, who they think won, if they care to put it that way, who they think scored the most points. John Chancellor and other members of our news staff are in Philadelphia and will be ready with this. As I say, that's at 11:30 Eastern Time, after a half-hour break for the local news across the country. And we'll be back with that, whatever happens to the audio from the theater at this time. And again, I don't know what's happened, except that we're not getting it. Nobody is getting it. It's the same on... It's the same everywhere, so you needn't change the channels looking for it. It's the same on all of them. It's still out, right? Doug Kiker is out. Where is Doug? He is in the lobby just outside of the hall. Doug, you can't tell us what has happened there, can you?
David, we don't know what's happened. We're as much surprised by what's going on as you are. They were talking and suddenly they quit. We all jumped up out here too. As you know, this was a pool arrangement, one network responsible, so all we're doing is standing by just the way you are. We expect the debates to go on, of course, immediately that audio is assumed, but what the problem is, how long it's going to take to fix it, whether the debate will have to be canceled or not, We just don't know. We're isolated in a corridor here, and the problem is even not in the theater. The problem, as you know, is in the technical trucks, undoubtedly, outside the auditorium. It's a technical problem. It's, as someone says, it is not a conspiracy, but how long it's going to take to fix it, we just don't know.
You don't have a screwdriver and a pair of pliers on you, Doug, do you?
I do not, David, no.
All right.
Well, we've seen, if I could make a few comments while we're waiting, we have seen a very lively debate, it seems to me, so far. It seems to me that both candidates pretty much are saying the same thing that they have been saying in the early parts of these campaigns, making pretty much the same charges, but very tougher, sometimes even rough tonight. Both heavy on their facts to back up their arguments, as we knew Governor Carter intended to come here to convince the American public that he really did know the facts and had the knowledge. President Ford, of course, is fact-filled from the knowledge of his office. President Ford has strongly defended his economic policies in these debates tonight. He has pointed to the fact that the improved economy is proof of their wisdom. He did this very forcefully. Mr. Carter came back, disputed this, and in one of the tough segments charged that President Ford is insensitive to the plight of the unemployed. Now, excuse me, do we have audio back now?
Play again.
Bill, can you turn the sound up?
We still do not have audio back. Both candidates are waiting. They have been told that they're on the air with a picture, but they are off the air with their voices. To go on, tax reform, President Ford announced tonight that he will sign that new tax bill, all 1,500 pages of it, even though he said he was dissatisfied with some provisions that were in it. Mr. Carter called the present tax structure a welfare program for the rich. And Mr. Carter also talked, and so did President Ford, about the new federal social programs. Mr. Carter said that he would install the federal programs that he had promised, but that should it come down to it, a choice between those programs being innovated or balancing the budget, that he would choose in favor of balancing the budget. President Ford said any surplus from the federal spending should go directly right back to tax relief. Both men outlined at great length their plans to curb unemployment. Mr. Carter said that he believed his programs could bring unemployment down to 3% within a few years. Mr. Ford got into the Democratic platform. He said that if all of the proposals in the Democratic platform were adopted, it would create 60 new programs, which he said would cost $100 to $200 billion more. And Mr. Carter immediately rejoined by saying that Richard Nixon said the same thing about the programs proposed by the Democrats 16 years ago when John F. Kennedy was the nominee. The two men discussed draft evaders and what the programs there should be. Mr. Ford said that he does not believe in any cross-the-board pardons. He said he believed that the amnesty program which he put forth was adequate and that he would not change it. And Mr. Carter said that he still would grant pardon, and he insisted that there is a difference between pardon and amnesty. The two men talked about government reorganization at some length. And Jimmy Carter, as he has so often done this whole election year, promised forcefully that he would completely reorganize the federal government if he's elected and waste no time about it. President Ford then countered that by saying that he has looked into the facts and figures of Governor Carter's record as governor of Georgia, and that the fact is that Governor Carter increased the Georgia budget and also increased the number of state employees while he was there. He also said that the present governor of Georgia, Governor Busby, found that the Medicaid program in Georgia was, in Governor Busby's words, a shamble. As far as the Democratic Congress is concerned, President Ford, a Republican president, charged that the Democratic Congress had not really been working with him. Jimmy Carter said other Republican presidents have found it feasible and possible to work with Democratic Congresses. He pointed out that President Eisenhower had done this, and he said that Richard Nixon, he said for all of his faults, I can't remember the exact words, was a strong leader and managed to work with a Democratic Congress and impose far fewer vetoes than President Ford had imposed. And then he got very tough with, momentarily with President Ford. He said, I'm not a member of Congress. He said, the Democratic Congress is not under my control. And so he said, if you're going to blame me for that, you can blame me for, I'll blame you for Watergate also. We have here just stepped out Ronald Nessen, who is the presidential press secretary. He's talking now, so we'll listen in. What's going on in there?
I don't know any more about it than you do, Doug. I guess they were down to the last few minutes, and the sound suddenly cut out, but I don't know what the explanation is.
And so what happens now? Will the debates continue, or?
I don't know. We were listening upstairs on the monitor, and Ed Newman wasn't quite clear what was going to happen either.
You have no contingency plan, obviously, for such a thing to happen.
I think you're supposed to be the one with the contingency plan. We don't know what happened, and I guess the president will wait and let those putting on the debates decide what to do.
Well, you're sitting in there with some members of the president's administration, the Secretary of Transportation, Coleman, Ambassador of the United Nations, Scranton, you yourself, Mr. Hartman, his speechwriter. What's your impression? How do you think your guy's doing so far?
Well, we think we talked, we had a little time to talk after the sound went off, and we sort of polled each other. And everybody came to the same conclusion, and that is that it was a clear-cut victory for the president.
Well, I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear, being partisan, you're saying that. Is this debate tougher, in your opinion, than you thought it would be? Some pretty tough exchanges in there, it seems to us.
Well, I thought the president came across, though. I agree the questions were tough, and the reporters were well prepared and had done a lot of research, but I think the president came across, to us watching anyhow, as being in command of the situation, in control. It seemed to me he had the opportunity through the tough questions to demonstrate experience, his background, his knowledge, and his ability.
Well, the same thing, I think, also could be said for Governor Carter. At least he was spouting a lot of facts and figures. We haven't had all of these debates yet, Mr. Nessen. At least we haven't had the completion of this one. How much time did we get cut out on? 12, 15 minutes. Do you think that some provision could be made for the viewing public to hear what's over, what was left out?
Well, the president said from the very beginning, Doug, and the reason that he wanted to do the debates in the first place, and the reason he wanted them to be done at great length, 90 minutes at a minimum, was because he felt the time was needed to explore issues in depth. And I think they were explored in depth tonight.
Thank you very much. This is Press Secretary Ronald Nessen. Now, over just on the other side, to the left, is a man who I think will say that he thinks that Jimmy Carter was as clear a winner as Mr. Nessen thinks Mr. Ford was, and that is the Democratic Party Chairman, Robert Strauss, who is already talking, so let's listen into what he's saying.
I think it was a good night for the American people, a great night for Jimmy Carter.
Did you think that either man looked particularly nervous or ill at ease?
No, I didn't think either one of them looked nervous or ill at ease. I thought this. They both handled their questions well.
Just trying to get you in our picture, too.
I think that they both handled the questions well. As I said, I thought the president looked programmed. I thought Governor Carter looked, on the contrary, he looked responsive, and they both fielded questions well. And I think Governor Carter clearly demonstrated what he wanted to demonstrate, an ability to deal with issues facing this country.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You calling winners and losers, Robert Strauss? You're obviously saying that you think Jimmy Carter won this debate.
Well, I said this. I thought there were two winners. I think the American public won because they got a chance to see this debate and see these two men. I also think they both handled their questions well. I think Governor Carter...
I understand we're back with the debate. Excuse me, Robert Strauss. Now let's go back to the auditorium for President Ford and Mr. Carter.
Tell them to hurry up. We're going to win the next one also, Bob.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your kind words.
I think I've got an anti-NBC.
Well, we thought we had it, but we don't. We still don't know what's wrong nor where. We hoped we'd have it back by now, but we don't. Nor do I know if they will continue the debates long enough to make up for the lost time. So this will be, we will all learn whatever we learn together. I don't know anything. The President and Mr. Carter. President, Mr. Carter are waiting while whatever is wrong, wherever it is not in our audio, as you've heard from Doug Kiker just outside the theater. It's in the sound coming from the rostrum there. And we don't know what the problem is, but they're waiting. We're getting a lot of miscellaneous conversation from various places in the hall, but not the conversation we went there to listen to, which was the President and Mr. Carter, of course. It was, as you've heard, a pretty lively debate, each one landing a few blows on the other, though I don't think anyone was permanently disabled, politically speaking. One question that was dealt with very firmly and decisively and clearly was that of evaders and deserters, draft evaders and military deserters. Mr. Ford thought the government should not go any further than it has already gone in his administration, whereas Carter thinks it should. His point was that if Nixon could be pardoned, then why not the evaders? Ford said he gave them a chance to work their way back into American society. Some accepted, and some didn't. Doug Kiker is outside the theater and can still be heard from, though the participants inside cannot. Doug?
Yes, David, we are here with Jim Baker, who is President Ford's national campaign manager. Mr. Baker, let me ask you this. Did things go pretty well according to game plan tonight? Tell us how the president prepared for this. How hard did he study? And was he nervous when he went up there? I would be, talking to 120 million people, or however many.
I last talked to the president last night, Doug, and he was not nervous at all. He was quite relaxed. He was self-assured, and from looking at him when he first went on the stage, it would be my judgment that he was quite relaxed and quite confident and quite self-assured.
Any surprises tonight?
No surprises, no. I think the president did an excellent job. I think he was in command. He was decisive, and more than anything else, Doug, I think he answered the questions. He was specific. They asked him for specifics, he gave them specifics.
Again, tell us about the preparation. Did President Ford sit back and have people bounce questions to him in a sort of a game plan way?
There was some of that, yes, but he studied, he worked hard, he worked on his preparation, and he was well prepared. But sure, there was some of that.
And in the preparation, were the questions that you tried to brainstorm, did any of them really come up?
There were some that I think we anticipated very well, yes.
What do you think President Ford, Jimmy Carter, of course, is ahead in the polls, but what do you think President Ford got out of agreeing to debate? After all, he is the incumbent with all the powers of office, and Jimmy Carter wasn't all that well known.
Well, that's very true, but Jimmy Carter was not all that well known, and his positions on the issues were even less well known, Doug, and that's one of the major reasons that we wanted this debate, was so that Governor Carter would have to take some positions on the issues, and the president's positions are well known.
Well, now we have a man over here, Jody Powell, and I'm going to come in with you, Leslie, if you don't mind. Jody, come over. You can do us both, okay?
Well, whatever.
This is Jimmy Carter's press secretary, Jody Powell, who's about to go on the air with CBS. But since we're here in this thing all together, I'll ask you, how do you think your man did tonight?
Well, I think the real winner tonight was the American people. They heard a good discussion, but I thought Governor Carter was very impressive. He demonstrated a clear command of the issues, of the facts, and the specifics that were involved in this discussion, and in the debate between the two presidential contenders. There's no doubt in my mind that there was a clear advantage all the way through in terms of dealing directly with the issues that in question.
He was pretty tough on President Ford. He said that President Ford was insensitive to the problems of the unemployed. He said that if President Ford was going to blame him for the Democratic Congress, that he ought to be blamed for being part of the Watergate. Did you
I believe you
anticipate
misquoted
that?
him there. That sometimes happens. He said that if the unjust charge was made that he was responsible for all the actions of the Democratic Congress, which he'd never been a part of, then perhaps it would be, I think, with a bit of tongue-in-cheek, appropriate to ask President Ford to accept responsibility for the previous administration. He did not at all say that he was part of Watergate.
How do you think these debates compared to 1960? Do you think they were as interesting or as decisive?
There is no way in the world that I could compare. From my point of view, these debates to 1960, I was a junior in high school when those Kennedy-Nixon debates took before. As a matter of fact, there's some question about how decisive those debates were then. I don't think elections are decided on one night. It would suit me fine if the election were decided on this night, however.
Could you just give us a real quick assessment of how your candidate did?
I thought he did very well. He showed a tremendous command of the specifics of the details of the federal government. I think he made his points directly. The comparison between the Republican rhetoric and their record in the White House came through very directly, so I'm very happy.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Powell, we've asked Mr. Ness, and he says he doesn't know what went on. Do you know why the mics went on?
I don't, but I'd certainly like to know. This, of course, took place right in the middle of Governor Carter's rebuttal, and I'd certainly like to know. I assume it was a technical problem that sometimes happens.
I ask that because it's been my experience in a situation like this that there's always a theory held by a lot of people that, oh, there was a conspiracy to cut him off. We have no proof of that. It was just simply a technical foul-up as far as we can determine. Isn't it correct?
Not only do you have no proof, but nobody's brought up the subject that I know of, have they?
Not as far as I know. Now, tell me this.
I think, I think perhaps it shows that everybody makes mistakes every now and then.
Even the networks.
That's right.
Let me ask you this.
I wouldn't get you to criticize the networks, of course. Because
how much consultation did you have and other senior members of the Carter staff have with Jimmy Carter in preparation for these debates? Was he anxious about it? How much rest did he get tonight? Was he nervous and apprehensive as he come in? I know you're going to say he was cool as a cucumber. Okay. But tell us a little bit about what he did. What did he do the hour before he came here?
I don't know. He and Mrs. Carter were together for 4 or 5 hours this afternoon. I didn't bother him, and neither did anybody else, so far as I know. He's had 2 or 3 days of rest. I suppose the best way to judge whether he was cool as a cucumber or not was by his performance tonight. And I thought he handled himself very well, obviously, as I would. And he's primarily had time to himself. We haven't engaged in rehearsals, and we haven't done a lot of fancy gimmicks. We've given him time to do as he wished, primarily to study, to read, to reflect, and to think. And I think that paid off this evening.
Mr. Powell, a lot has been written in this last 4 or 5 days that Jimmy Carter's campaign is losing steam. The Playboy article, the Illinois poll, which shows Gerald Ford running ahead, a general feeling among the press that's covering Jimmy Carter that his campaign may be losing a little steam.
Well, fortunately for most campaigns, the election is held amongst American people, not on the day-to-day opinions of the whatever they are of the press that happens to be covering the campaign. We have run a very active and aggressive campaign. Governor Carter has submitted himself to cross-examinations 4 and 5 times a day for the past 18 months. In those circumstances, there's no way that you can shield yourself from an ill-chosen word here or there. We think that in the long run, the American people would rather have a candidate and a president who goes out and meets them and takes the hard knocks and the tough questions and answers them as responsibly and directly as he can, even though he might make a mistake every now and then. So,
thank you very much. That's Jody Powell, who is the press secretary for Governor Carter. And now I think back to David Brinkley.
I gather the debate is over. Is that right? The League of Women Voters has decided not to go ahead with any more of the debate. It's now 11:15 in the East. It was scheduled to end 15 minutes ago. It actually ended almost a half hour ago because of some sound failure inside the hall. We do not know at the moment what happened nor why nor exactly where. As I have said, our sound from the lobby of the theater and the outside of the theater has been normal and still is. The problem is somewhere inside the hall, on or around the podium. That's all we know, which is not a great deal. So again, the debate is over, and that's it. We have had some discussion of it. We've heard from some prominent Democrats and some prominent Republicans, each of whom thought his side won and gave his reasons why. Our plan is to return to the air in about a half hour for a somewhat more extensive We'll be back later, and in the meantime, Catherine Mackin is talking to Mrs. Carter. Catherine?
Mrs. Carter, we were just wondering, everybody's been following this sudden breakup in the debate, and do you think this will have any effect at all on what's going on, or do you think your husband will just ride with the waves here?
Well, I certainly think that if we could have done anything about it, we would have kept it going, because Jimmy was just doing so great.
Do you have any idea?
I think if they come back on, he'll get a chance to...
Do you have any idea at all what he was going to say in his summation?
No, I don't. I read it. I just glanced at it briefly. I've been campaigning all day. I've been in Texas all day and got in late. And I looked at it, glanced at it, but I don't know. He'd have to tell you that.
While you've been campaigning, have you noticed whether or not the interview in Playboy magazine is having any effect on your husband's campaign?
No, I think people are putting that in perspective. You haven't heard anything about it tonight and this afternoon, and it was just such a complete distortion of what Jimmy said, completely out of context. And I think everybody in the country is going to read it because there's been so much publicity about it. And when they do, they will see that Jimmy was talking about his Christian religion to people that did not understand what Christianity is. And it's a very good article if you read it.
Now, when you were speaking with Mrs. Johnson this afternoon, did you iron things out with her for what your husband said about President Johnson in the
I had a
article?
very good visit with Mrs. Johnson. She met me when I flew into San Antonio yesterday, and then she received me at the library, had a reception for me at the library in Austin today. It was very pleasant.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jimmy Carter. Now back to David.
Could we ask?
Well, we are told the debate has ended, but on the other hand, President Ford and Governor Carter are still there on the rostrum waiting. All we know about the breakdown in the sound is that it's somewhere between the microphones you see clipped to their neckties and the network truck outside the hall. Beyond that, I can't go because I don't know. I don't think anyone knows at the moment. If anyone did, he'd fix it. We don't know whether they... I keep telling you what I don't know, which is a great deal. We don't know if they're going to continue the debate and wait for the sound to be fixed. Ed Newman is saying something no doubt interesting, but I haven't the faintest idea what it is because I can't hear him.
Failure in the debate and the failure in the broadcasting of the debate. It occurred 27 minutes ago. The fault has been dealt with, and we want to thank President Ford and Governor Carter for being so patient and understanding while this delay went on. We very much regret the technical failure that lost the sound as it was leaving this theater. It occurred during Governor Carter's response to what would have been and what was the last question put to the candidates. That question went to President Ford. It dealt with the control of government intelligence agencies. Governor Carter was making his response and had very nearly finished it. He will conclude that response now, after which President Ford and Governor Carter will make their closing statements. Governor?
There has been too much government secrecy and not enough respect for the personal privacy of American citizens.
It is now time for the closing statements, which are to be up to 4 minutes long. Governor Carter, by the same toss of the coin that directed the first question to you, you are to go first now.
Well, tonight we've had a chance to talk a lot about the past, but I think it's time to talk about the future. Our nation in the last 8 years has been divided as never before. It's a time for unity. It's a time to draw ourselves together, to have a president and a Congress that can work together with mutual respect for a change, cooperating for a change, and they're open for a change so that people can understand their own government. It's time for government, industry, labor, manufacturing, agriculture, education, other entities in our society to cooperate. And it's a time for government to understand and to cooperate with our people. For a long time, our American citizens have been excluded, sometimes misled, sometimes have been lied to. This is not compatible with the purpose of our nation. I believe in our country. It needs to be competent. The government needs to be well managed, efficient, economical. We need to have a government that's sensitive to our people's needs, to those who are poor, who don't have adequate health care, who have been cheated too long with our tax programs, who've been out of jobs, whose families have been torn apart. And we need to restore the faith and the trust of the American people in their own government. In addition to that, we've suffered because we haven't had leadership in this administration. We've got a government of stalemate. We've lost a vision of what our country can and ought to be. This is not the America that we've known in the past. It's not the America that we have to have in the future. I don't claim to know all the answers, but I've got confidence in my country. Our economic strength is still there. Our system of government, in spite of Vietnam, Cambodia, CIA, Watergate, is still the best system of government on earth. And the greatest resource of all are the 215 million Americans who still have within us the strength, the character, the intelligence, the experience, the patriotism, the idealism, the compassion, the sense of brotherhood on which we can rely in the future to restore the greatness to our country. We ought not to be excluded from our government anymore. We need a president who can go in, who derives his strength from the people. I owe the special interest nothing. I owe everything to you, the people of this country. And I believe that we can bind our wounds. I believe that we can work together. And I believe that if we can tap the tremendous, untapped reservoir of innate strength in this country, that we can once again have a government as good as our people and let the world know what we still know and hope for, that we still live in the greatest and the strongest and the best country on earth.